Let's talk to Trevor Kavanagh right now. Trevor, very good afternoon to you.
Hi, Mike.
So, I don't know whether you share my, I'd say optimism that there is a great deal of pressure now being brought to bear, I think, on from all sides on Boris Johnson, because we found out over the weekend that not only did Matt Hancock not provide all of the information that he could have provided in order to keep this day as the lockdown lifting day for June the 21st, because he didn't tell the Prime Minister that the vaccines were actually working better than they thought.
Yes, and I think that the hospitalizations and the death rate have told the same story, that in fact the numbers are falling. It's leveling off at worst. And I think that Boris Johnson must have felt like one of those people who jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge and regretted it the moment they let go, when he announced on the 19th that he wasn't going to have Freedom Day today after all. And, you know, he and all the ministers, including Matt Hancock, at the very beginning, when we started to get these wonderful vaccines, were saying it's not how you go into a pandemic with people dying everywhere, it's how you come out of it. They were really so buoyant about the fact that they are going to emerge covered in glory. Well, I think that they may not in the end, with everybody else doing better than we are.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, when you see football crowds in Hungary at capacity, when you see people in the United States of America, going to nightclubs, even when you look at Royal Ascot, even when you look at what happened at the G7, I don't think anyone who attended the G7 looked as if they were frightened of catching COVID. They looked as if they were more than happy to do whatever they wanted.
Exactly. I think that the general public, despite the opinion polls, which I find completely bewildering, because I haven't met anyone who says that they think this should go on and on. It seems only to be Sage and a few people who work for the public sector, I think, and those on furlough. So I think that what we have is a situation where Boris personally, I'm sure, deeply regrets the fact that he did what he did the other day and has postponed what should have been our Freedom Day today, another 4 weeks of purgatory. And I think that most people in their private lives are going about them as if they were not locked down. So it's and another thing, if they now show that they're abandoning the sort of restrictions everyone else is having to accept, to allow these UEFA officials in for the final, the cup final, I think that will go down like a lead balloon, and people are just going to carry on breaking the rules.
Well, I mean, you saw Royal Ascot at the weekend, where plenty of people seemed more than happy to sing and dance and sing God Save the Queen and hang out with each other very closely without wearing masks. I mean, I think that the game is up, as we would have said in the old days.
Yes, the main point is that we've got to the situation where almost 80% of the adult population has been vaccinated at least once. And one vaccination, one jab alone, is pretty good protection. 2 jabs, which is a pretty large proportion of the general public anyway, and certainly all those most vulnerable to it, is almost completely complete immunity. So why are we doing this? Why are we in Britain, which led the way with these vaccinations, trailing behind Germany and quite a lot of the European Union, and certainly the United States of America, where people are free to do as they please?
Exactly right. And I was looking at some statistics this morning, Trevor, where apparently there's about 1,000 or so people in hospital currently in the country with COVID. In, I think, last year's first lockdown, when it was thought to be serious, it was 14,000. And in January, it was 34,000, right? So clearly, it's a very much smaller number. And when we hear them talking in terms of percentages, rocketing up, it's percentages of very small numbers.
Yes, and what we seem to be terrified is of something happening of which we know nothing yet. It may be that there will be other variants. It may be some remote possibility that they would be more dangerous. But there's been nothing so far. None of the variants, the mutants, have turned out to be any more deadly than the Kent variant, which was the first of them. And I think that we are overreacting. And what is even worse, Sage is now telling us that we may have to have further lockdowns in the winter. I don't think we should ever have another lockdown again.
No, I think absolutely you're completely correct. And of course, the government keep telling us, well, the reason we are waiting is because we don't want to have another lockdown. I'm afraid I don't really believe them. I mean, your column today about Boris being kind of unassailable is very similar to something I said a few weeks ago, where it was like, what does he have to do to become unpopular? I mean, he pretty much could do anything he wants, really.
But it's a little bit worrying, Mike, that he's not prepared to put at risk any of that stockpile of capital that he's managed to accumulate over the period that he's been Prime Minister. I mean, he's way ahead of Keir Starmer in the polls, way ahead of Labour, which has basically disappeared off the radar, and is free to do pretty much as he pleases, as long as he presents it in a way which makes it clear that he's considered all the risks and all the benefits and all the upsides and downsides. If he were to do that and be straight with the people, level with the voters, look, there is a slight risk, but just about everybody that's in any way vulnerable has been vaccinated twice. We can take this risk and live our lives as normal again. I think as things stand, he's so terrified of criticism that we may never live our lives as we once did again.
I think that's the worry, isn't it? Because surely to God, at some point, and you and I have spoken about this before, the collateral damage, the people around the lockdown, the people who have suffered during the lockdown, surely at what point does their life come into question? When does their quality of life actually get protected? You know, what's good in any of this for them?
Well, not until we disband SAGE as it stands at the moment and stop them from speaking out individually as freelance spokesmen for the medical fraternity, and make sure that they speak with one voice, preferably through Matt Hancock, and not by people like Neil Ferguson, Susan Michie and others who just go on and scaremonger on the radio, on BBC in particular.
Yeah, it is quite extraordinary, isn't it, that people are walking around on the one hand with a knowledge in their heads of how dangerous it is, i.e. not very, and yet every time you switch on the BBC, you would think we were literally at sort of peak January levels of infection and peak levels of death, which we're not.
You have to ask also, Mike, why on earth are they and others broadcasting every day, every evening on primetime television, the casualty rate for an illness which has become no longer a danger to the public? It is about as small in terms of hospitalizations and death rates as is possible to be. You're more likely to die from falling down a stepladder than from COVID.
Yeah.
And how often does that happen? So, I mean, you have to get this into context and to perspective. And one of the most important aspects is the economy now. The economy is more important at the moment than the threat from COVID.
Well, it really is. I mean, again, the Telegraph have thankfully taken to putting the full figure of number of deaths from every single cause on the front page in addition to COVID. And today, 1,111 people is the figure of number of people who died. 6 of them died from COVID. I mean, that's all you need to know, isn't it?
It is. And it would be interesting to see the BBC and Sky TV putting cameramen and crews outside, say, the Royal Marsden to interview weeping cancer victims and their families, as they did with COVID at the peak period. They are now more at risk, and others from other non-COVID life-threatening disease, than anything that we're facing from this pandemic. So we should be shifting our focus now to getting back on an even keel, dealing with that huge backlog of 1 million patients who need serious health care, and stop panicking about a disease which is now under control.
And what is going on inside of Downing Street, Trevor? I mean, you talk to people in the business of the cabinet. We're told that the cabinet has kind of become a bit non-existent in the sense that it's now a very small clique of people in a room. And if you're not in that clique, then you're not really getting told what's going on. And certainly it seems that an awful lot of cabinet ministers don't know what's going on. But, you know, there doesn't seem to be many people in that room talking about what we are talking about and getting the economy moving again.
Well, what I can tell you, Mike, is that there are very senior cabinet ministers who couldn't answer that question either. They aren't being told, they're not being consulted, they learn about events afterwards, and these are very senior figures who should be consulted. I mean, the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, is not being told about major spending plans on, for instance, the environment, green energy, and the new royal yacht and so on. And, you know, this is something which a relationship between the Chancellor and the Prime Minister is pivotal in any government. And I think that Boris is taking liberties with this. And he seems to have not the slightest clue about spending as long as he's spending it. He doesn't know, it doesn't matter where it comes from or where it goes. And this is part of his private life as much as it is his now public life.
Yeah, but that's the thing, you know, what is kind of very, I suppose, attractive in Boris as a leader is also now becoming almost equally unattractive in his decision-making process.
Yes, the thing is, though, that Boris is effectively unassailable because whatever we are saying now, right at this moment, he is the most popular politician around at the moment. And I think if he did, say he called a general election tomorrow, he would sweep the country.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what you and I say. It's what the people out there think of him, which is that he's rather a cuddly-looking guy, and they like his bashful image, and they'll forgive him anything.
But will that last?
That's his strongest suit.
But will that last forever, Trevor? Because if, for example, and it's not completely out of the question that we got to July the 19th and suddenly he went, well, do you know what? We've still got some of these variants knocking around. We still have to be careful. Let's put it off for another 4 weeks. I think people are going to start to lose their faith in him if he does that.
Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head, Mike, because what he's saying privately, I can tell you, is that it definitely will be July the 19th and no later, no matter what. But I don't think anybody trusts him anymore when he says these things, because we've heard it before many times, and suddenly, on the eve of developments which are not in any way sensational or unexpected, he changes, he turns on a sixpence. And there are so many examples of that, I couldn't even begin to list them. But this is the key to it, the point you made about trust. And if that runs out at a particularly important part in the political calendar at some point, when he needs us to trust him most, I think that could be the dangerous point for him.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Trevor, great to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed. Trevor